How do you transform or alchemize long-standing patterns? You start with a bit of curiosity, a big dose of compassion, and a willingness to shine a light on your own process. Join me in welcoming Nandy Wise to Mystical Sisterhood. Nandy is a soul care coach as well as a conscious parenting coach. And today you'll take away ways in which to reparent yourself, feel into your soul knowings and trust them, as well as ground yourself in the stress, chaos, and busyness of the outer world. Thank you, Nandy, for being here. And thank you, the listener, for being with us too. See you in the episode. Welcome back to Mystical Sisterhood. This is your host, Maureen Spielman, and today I'm with Nandita Wise. And Nandi and I met through Dr. Shefali's conscious parenting program, although we didn't really get to form a close relationship at that time because there were so many people in it and we were put in different groups. But we've had real crossover in Susie Lula's soul care certification and the ongoing mastery that we do weekly with her, and crossover in groups and just this opportunity to get to know each other. And I have to say, just a shout out to the programs that we've come through because they attract the absolute best people. And I think those that are really pure of heart. And I wanted to have you on today, Nandi, and for the listeners, because we always go places. We've not only studied everything and more that we have talked about on the podcast so far, the concepts, the ways of living, the ways that we are so invested in learning, how we can be more at peace, have more clarity, give more compassion to ourselves, just all these things in our lives. And I really stand for on the podcast bringing messages like this to anyone who tunes in to know that we talk about these things from different angles and perspectives over and over, and new perspectives are brought in with each and every guest. But that's my hope, that it becomes applicable. Something we say, something we touch upon really touches the lives of the listeners. So today, Nandi and I had talked about putting a few topics out like self-care rituals. We really intrigued by this concept of ancestral lineage and really transforming patterns that have come down either through possibly past lives or our family of origin. But just being so exhilarated by these topics ourselves, we join in conversation today. So having said all that, Nandi, I want to make space for you to say welcome.
Thank you. I'm so honored to have this time with you and your listeners, and just thrilled to be able to talk about all these
Mm.
topics.
And
Yeah.
I love that you say that because I know that some of the listeners, they're all our sisters or our brothers, but you mentioned this feeling of almost like a soul knowing or a soul sisterhood. And you just remarked like, oh, you probably had the name of the podcast just pop in your head one day. And that's truly, I feel like it was a gift given to me. I really don't feel so responsible for having forced it, a creation of it in my mind. It just came, but I really welcome you as part of the Mystical Sisterhood, part of this soul sisterhood where we really are looking out for one another.
Yeah, I love
Mm.
that. Just as you're speaking, I'm thinking of Rumi's quote, lovers don't just suddenly find each other, but they are in each other all along.
Mm.
And just even as you mentioned, like we didn't meet during the period we were in Shefali's course, but in my feeling, is we were bound to meet.
That's such a beautiful point. I'll tell like a little story about that, which is it shows how if someone is meant to be in our orbit, I don't know if we always, because I know that we take different directions. I always think of the old Gwyneth Paltrow movie Sliding Doors, where if she hadn't made the train, if the doors had closed, her life would have taken a different direction. And I just love that concept and I think it's true, but how we were in each other's orbit and it just took a while for us to find each other in a deeper way. And last weekend here in Chicago, the celebration of life was held for our dear colleague and friend Nani Langenstein. And our teacher Susie Lula came in, as well as Ariana Mesplay, who was just on talking about angels. And I think Susie and I put together that where Nani's home was in Chicago was only blocks away from where I lived in Chicago, like literally 6 blocks. And then Susie had spent many years coming to Chicago, and she has a wonderful friend who had a spiritual center called the Bodhi Center. And these three places were all within, it's considered like Lincoln Park or Wrigleyville area in Chicago, north side of Chicago. And that orbital dance, let's call it, occurred across the span of about 20 years, I'd say. And we didn't know each other within that geographical, we didn't meet within that, yet we each were in there. So I found that fascinating from a top down, how if we had a top down view, what do you think of this? Like, where we could see like all the souls doing their everyday thing. And it's just a matter of time. We're going to, I don't know if you would say magnetize, or we're going to, like you just said, we're going to find each other.
We're gonna find each other. I just so believe that. I want to tell you a little story about my brother. Is we're 8 years apart, and I was born in India, and when I came to Canada, I was in junior kindergarten, and I used to tell my teachers in kindergarten, I'm not sure how often, but quite often, that I had a baby brother. So I'd come in Monday morning and say, "Oh, my mom just gave birth, and I now have a baby brother." And
Wow.
I was not a kid who lied about anything, but this was a thing. For some reason, I was also very shy, but yet I felt very compelled to tell people this. And so this was something in my family for many years. We used to laugh about it. My mom thought it was hilarious, that the teachers would be saying, "Did you have a baby on the weekend?" So, and my mom is a very tiny Indian woman. So anyway, I did like this past life regression about 7 years ago. And my experience in that, I realized, was you talk about souls that know they're going to meet, was I knew he was coming. I was sort of waiting for him and
Mhm.
maybe being impatient and telling everyone he was already born. And then he was born when I was 8. But I shared that with him, and it was like really mind blowing because it shifted our perspective, his and mine, on that whole, like, me going to school and telling everyone that he was born. And I used to feel this pang when I used to see at recess the other little kids, their moms bringing a stroller and a little sister, a little brother.
Mhm.
And I think what that experience also taught me is those pangs are not to be dismissed. Like,
Mm.
they really are the souls letting us know something. So even I remember the first time I read that quote, that Rumi quote, and maybe I didn't say it quite right, but I remember just thinking, wow, that is like this knowingness. It's like, yeah, we do recognize each other. And we may take 20 years to
Mhm.
find the person
Mhm.
who's 3 doors away,
Mhm.
but or 3 blocks, but we are absolutely destined. And I know, like, one of the conversations that you and Susie had was about how can you know someone for 4 years or five
Mhm.
years and feel so much intimacy with them. And I think
Yeah.
that's why. And I think
Yeah.
we've had probably other times, other lives together where we sort of put a comma in the sentence, and it's like, you know what? I'll get back to you next lifetime for the rest of
Yeah.
this conversation.
Yeah, that's also beautiful though. Thank you for that story. I think for anyone listening, I got chills when you were telling it something about that. And when you got to that soul, the soul knowing and the soul remembering. I think in the introduction in my life in the last almost 4 years, 4+ years now, since for me, the foundation from a bigger expansion really did come with Dr. Shafali's programs and our program that we went through that was very, in a sense, rigorous. Anyone listening, any other coaches we went through, it was the fall of the pandemic and we all were just tied to our notes and our studies, but it was really beautiful. And I find this with women I meet and souls that when we start to enter in this kind of language, that to me it's like awakening language sometimes. So like how you just describe that as like something that my soul knows. You didn't just say like intuition or inner knowing. You're like something, it was soul level that was activated, or I was thinking of that word, just remembered. There's a remembrance.
Yeah, there's, I think, a knowing, and being in Dr. Shafali's that particular cohort, I just also want to just express a heartfelt bow for Nani. and
Mm, mhm,
appreciating her presence there and in the work like we've all continued together. One of the things you were just talking about before we started recording was just about that love can be patient. And when you were saying that, and this knowing, which is also comes with the feeling of love, but it reminded me of the word reverence. And I
mhm,
feel like reverence can have like that pang, that feeling of I've known you before. I feel really close to you, and I've hardly spent very much time with you, and I think that there's a sense of reverence in that for me.
mm,
It has such a soulful quality, and it's because we're in this culture where we're always asked to do things linear and build our CV and prove our accomplishments and the next thing and the next thing. And so it's like I know for me, even when I first started to embrace my intuition, that was a really scary thing because this soul knowing, and you're right, it is even beyond intuition, I think. But it's not really something in general you get a lot of validation for. And yet at the same time, it's really the thing I think for so many of us, even despite all our accomplishments, at the end of that, we end up struggling and feeling like it's not enough. And I think
mhm.
that's what we're struggling for is that sense of, oh yeah, I know I have arrived. I arrived in my sense of love, my sense of knowing, and I trust myself.
Yeah, and I think, it reminds me how even in the podcast, I think one thing that I've really loved about it is to sit with another person, and it's only pieces of their story, but it's an allowance of that story to be told. And you had remarked to me recently that you just love to almost like luxuriate in another soul's story.
Yeah.
And was that always apparent to you, or more of a recent revelation as you learn part of like why you're here or what you're here to do? Yeah.
I think it always drove me, but it felt like my dirty little secret.
Mm,
But I do remember, like, from the time, like, I remember we would go on evening walks, my family, and I remember always looking at people with such a curiosity. And I just wanted to know with every person, like, what makes this person tick? And just to
mhm,
look at the faces of strangers and just like, I felt such a deep curiosity that has really never changed for me. And so even diving into psychology, and it was totally my soul mission to be
mhm,
in that kind of work, but I didn't really identify it more till recently. And I think Dr. Shafali's work is, yeah, it was really helpful because it was the first time I saw also like how my own personal inner complexes, my wounds, like how they drive the way I narrate my story and how I'm interacting with people. And uncovering that has been just a game changer. I still feel the curiosity about other people, but now I've been able to refocus it inward as well. And as you know, like so much of what we're doing with other people is projecting
mhm.
what we're seeing, our own.
Yeah,
There's a
there's
saying by Khalil Gibran, and it says, when you see magic and beauty in other people, it's because the magic and beauty is in you. So
mhm,
I like that because that's not just about core wounds and how we're projecting onto other
yeah.
people, but it's
Mhm.
also like we have these beautiful gifts that we also project onto other people.
Yes, and sometimes when we're in that position and we project that onto, "Oh, they have what I don't have." If we are not yet at the place where we're seeing is what you're saying, right? The magic within, it's just a place that hasn't been like a diamond that hasn't been polished off yet.
Yes.
It's not apparent to us quite yet.
Yes.
I just think about your journey too, about how you said, was it your parents who immigrated from India? Or
Yes.
were you born there? And then you said you came through Canada?
Yeah, I came through Canada when I was 5. And I will say there was a long time in my childhood and teenage years where I used to think, "Oh, what would have my life been like if we had never left?" And I there was a little part of me that used to feel like, "Oh, I'm an outsider here." But then I realized when we used to visit India, I was an outsider there too.
Mhm.
And actually now what I feel is that's really actually part of my life
Wow.
mission
Mhm.
is to understand what it is to be an outsider, and really, actually, everybody feels it to some extent.
it was more prominent in your story. And it was when things are more prominent in our story, those are kind of like, that's important. Like, I know it's important in terms of what my lessons are here in this lifetime. So that's fascinating. During these conversations, it's like I like to follow where I think we're being led. And I feel like even like the ancestral and what came through when your family came from India to Canada, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But where I'm also being, and so we'll see what comes with that. But I'm also curious because I think that we're all on the journey of self discovery and remembering the truth of who we are. So for you, what if you had to name, like if you look even at the past, you can name how many ever years. I don't know if you'd say 4 or 5, 10, 20. But when you see like those elements of yourself that you no longer identify with or were parts of your false self, or like on your journey to where you find yourself today, like, what were some of the big ahas that you've had, if you can describe to us?
So, like, I'll just want to say that I feel like the first time I had a really what you call an awakening, feel the first time was in my 20s. I did a lot of yoga and meditation from the time I was a child, but I experienced that as so I felt like before that, there was like this quality to life. Like, it's like, oh, life's happening to me, and I'm not really experiencing my own agency. And I think what going through that kind of shift, and I feel like I've been through many, it's like what happens is you start to realize it's like, oh, this is all about my agency. This is all about the stories I'm putting together, my perception of what's happening and how much I'm buying into it, how much I'm not buying into it. So, like we were just talking about being in conscious parenting, and I think one of the things is realizing for me the story I had deeply, deeply held with my mother was that my job was to take care of her, and I'm not enough if I don't do that. And in fact, not only am I not enough, like I realized I'd been actually through a guided process with Susie one day, and it was so powerful because I realized as I followed the thread of that belief, what I saw was I believed that I was dead. There was nothing but death on the other side of that chain
Mhm.
of I'm still work in progress, so it's not like I'm done with it, but I see it much more quickly,
Mhm.
which I
Mhm.
think is definitely game changer. And I feel like I see that for other people, and I feel so much compassion because I think so many people are struggling with that sense of or responsibility or people pleasing or whatever it is. And it's just my belief, but my belief is there is some element of life and death in that.
Mm.
And that's why
Mhm.
that has such an intensity,
Yeah.
people pleasing or playing small or feeling invisible or yeah, that's my feeling. And I that's a huge aha for me. Like I
Yeah.
and because it allows me the power to also tell myself a different story, a more life affirming one.
So I hear a lot of in you, just like openness and willingness, and just a willingness to open yourself to the process. And I don't know if you detach then, or not detach, but I guess understand through a different perspective how that relationship has been for you, or the process of what's occurred for you within how you have seen it in your life, if that's changed too.
With my mother? Yeah, I feel like this is I was gonna say this is maybe a little woo-hoo, but I don't like actually using that word because I feel like it takes us away from our own treasures. So I feel like being in meditation, and I feel like so many things, you can do that allow you for like all intensive purposes, I guess, altered consciousness. I think I've been sort of in states where just like seeing my brother before he actually came into being, I think even with my mom, I realized like she and I are here with very, very different purposes. And she probably on a soul level sought my assistance before I was born. And I think
Mm.
that's the agreement between us is that, and the work for me in this human form is accepting that she has a different mission. She has a different set of ways that she wants to be in this particular form. And I have certain ways of being. And then it feels very comfortable to be with people, other people who are like minded, being with soul brothers and soul sisters and having the same language and having the same sort of sense of, oh, I want aha moments and I want more wisdom into my life and my wounds. And then to have conversations with my mom, who is not interested in any of those things, can I accept her? And that's a constant. And I think even more recently, what I've realized is when I don't accept that, which is often, what it actually does to me is confirms that there's a victim here. I'm a victim. I'm a
Right.
victim of this person being this way. So that's been like amazing for me to just be like, whoa, that's this story I've had for a long time with her.
Absolutely. And how that, I'm just thinking out loud here, but how if we are in those roles of the over responsibility and people pleasing, and we're giving so much energy to whatever the other, where we're overdoing, is that conveniently keeps us in the role of life happening to us. And so it perpetuates. And I think the interesting thing is, because you're right, like you mentioned the awakening in your 20s, we have these different awakening points, and they may be more subtle, but you can look back and say like, oh, I really made a shift during that time. But there's something about what you're saying, it's that, and it starts with that awareness that, okay, this is, I feel like it's an awareness of this is what's going on here, but it's almost like taking the witnesser perspective and seeing ourselves from a different vantage point. And I think the beauty of the work we've studied too is, while we do that, maybe ways we've learned before to do that, we're lacking compassion. They ran on, there must be something wrong with me, or there's something to fix within me, or I'm broken. But when we start to look at even the ways we're showing up, like if we show up consistently, like earlier in my life, I was more volatile, I was easily reactive, things like that, is just if and when we can begin to witness ourselves and give ourselves compassion and be reminded through conversations like this, friends like you, loved ones, to give the compassion. And I think I always say that compassion is such an interesting concept. It's a little bit like love, right? That you hear it, or love's easier to say because we always, maybe for some, I shouldn't say that, but compassion is like that energetic quality. We all need so much of it. And yet it's just like this, it's like the simplest thing in the universe, yet it's not applied that often. And so I love, because I see in yourself, like giving yourself that
Fun one. So it was really specific because what happened, I remember, I think I had just left a meditation class and I just remember this song kept coming in my mind and I didn't even know whose song it was. And I kept hearing, I'm just watching the wheels turn and I'm thinking of this lyrics over and over. And I'm thinking, I don't know, is this Mick Jagger? Like what? And I had to, this internet was still not like that. We had it, but it wasn't like very familiar to me. So it was actually a while after that that I actually figured out it was John Lennon. And I remember like everything, the buildings, everything, the sidewalk, everything looked different. So there was like this physically, everything just started to look more alive and vibrant to me.
Mhm.
But I think if somebody's listening to this and there's a sense of like envy or anything, it's like, oh, I haven't been through that and I want that or something like that. I just feel like probably everyone has that happen in some way, even if it's really nuanced and subtle. And like when you're talking about compassion, it's that, like, just say, I remember like I was trying to give up coffee for this naturopathic program or something. And I was like, oh, I can't give that up. And just to have compassion for myself
Yeah.
over the fact that, oh, that's hard for me. It may
Mhm.
sound so trivial,
Mhm.
but to me, it's like an awakening is like almost like you change rooms. Like just say you changed your master bedroom to another room in the house. It's almost like that. You almost like change rooms. And it feels like if I could have compassion for myself, that I couldn't give up coffee or something, or I did it on Wednesday, Thursday, but then Friday I went back to having a cup of,
Mhm.
there's just even that subtle appreciation of yourself where
Mhm.
you may not have had it before. Like
Right.
to me, there is an awakening quality to that.
There is. And even when you're giving that example right there, is that So much is like how you just said, even the thing about, hey, if you haven't had an awakening, it's okay. It's there for us. There was so many things in what you just said. There is I think, the invitation to notice more. I'm cluing into how I feel when something is said to me or I experience something as really that inner knowing or just information that's coming to me for a reason. And so it can be, I just want to say, like, it can be the simplest. But what I hear in the song too, I know exactly what song you're talking about, is like the slowing down and paying attention. And the reason I love, a lot of the women and men who listen are in our age group, but there's a lot of younger listeners too. And I love your example there because it's simple, but it's profound. And it's an invitation to just be attending, not paying attention, because that's sort of doing, but attending to our surroundings, attending to our feelings, attending to what's coming up for us and noticing. And you are in the delight of that. That's one thought I had about what you just shared. Yeah. What comes to mind for you? Anything else there?
Yeah, I think that idea of like our expanded heart state,
Uh huh.
like as I'm sitting here and watching the smile on your face,
Mm-hmm.
it's expanding my heart. I don't have to go back to age 24 and have that moment.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause now I'm okay with more subtle things
Yeah.
too. And I have a lot of reverence for those subtle
Mm-hmm.
shifts. Like you were waiting for your daughter to come home.
Yeah.
I can empathize
Yeah.
how that must have felt for you as a mom. Like
Mhm,
that's
mhm.
very heart expanding for me.
Yeah, I love it, and the reason I will say this in every podcast, but I love the conversations because I love the work and I love the conversation because it brings more softness to us. And if
Mhm.
we can look at the next individual and really, like, back to your word, reverence, and hold what someone else is going through with such reverence. And what Nandi was referring to was yesterday when my second and third child were driving home from college. And of course, as nature would have it, not luck, but nature would have it, there was the first heavy snowfall of the season coming through the Midwest. And I was worried because I get anxiety when I drive, if anyone can relate to that, in clement weather. And like, I am the happiest person ever when the sun shines and the roads are clear. I'm like, I give such gratitude for driving and having that weather because it makes it so much easier. You were able to like just soften in that heart space and give compassion for it. And it's like we don't even have enough time for all the topics today, but you're a mother. How has being these new ways with yourself and with your awarenesses impacted how you parent?
So I feel like this is my most favorite topic, and it's my most favorite way of being in the world is being a parent. I think number one, it never occurred to me when this baby was born, or even when she was in my womb, or even when I was thinking of having her, it never occurred to me that this was going to be a whole journey of reparenting. And
Mhm.
it has been that to the nth degree. Like our friend Joe talks about inner child and putting our inner child like in front of us. We actually have children right in front of us. And we don't see their mistakes the way we see our own. We don't judge them. We make room for them to grow in a way that we don't make room for ourselves. And with being a mom, I think one of the things that are so important to me is I know I grew up in a mindset where my parents didn't want to compliment me a lot because I guess they thought it would spoil me or
Mhm.
make me lazy or less hardworking or something. But I know that it's hard for me now to appreciate myself. Like we were doing an exercise for our course with Susie where we had to write appreciations. I could not believe how hard it was to write one appreciation, let alone 10 on a daily basis for a month. So I realize it's so important. And I've always realized, I mean, even when she was in my stomach, I was playing the Beatles for her and giving her a lot of appreciation. And
Mhm.
so with everything that's on her inside and outside, just know, like for her to know that she is seen, she's heard, that her questions are really important to me, her opinions. And she has a sort of a quieter personality, so she tends to want to defer to my opinion. And like I'm always like, yeah, you can know my opinion, but I also equally want to know yours. It's also been like being aware that's okay, you know what, stay in curiosity. Maybe she did
Yeah.
something that's hard or so, like hard for me, for my inner child, but it's stay in curiosity with her. And
Mm,
so that is like a great gift. That's such a great gift. And like, I don't think parenting is easy at all,
yeah.
but these ways like compassion and these little subtle ways, again, I feel like it's like leaning into consciousness and feeling into it when you don't know the answers.
Such a beautiful description. And if we can see it that way, like what just dawned on me when you shared was that how you're parenting is concurrent with how you're reparenting yourself. We would assume, I think, that would be double the work. But is it really? Because if you're applying like this energy and shift for yourself and this curiosity and compassion, it just dances right next to it, like it just hand in hand. And then it feels very in alignment. And that's what, like, I love because how old is your daughter now?
She just turned 8, yeah.
She's 8, yeah, and I was talking to another woman whose daughter is about that, and just it's always so striking to me if we can be in these early ages, and it doesn't even matter because what by the time I started really applying it, my kids were much older. It doesn't matter if your kid's in your 20s or 30s. You gotta want it, you gotta wanna go there, and I think that usually is some sort of bumping that's happening that might create a desire like okay, there's something in me that I'm going to explore a little deeper here. I do believe that conscious parenting is really about it's like should the reparenting be at top and then like it that's the header and then the conscious parenting is underneath it.
Yeah, you described, I know before we recorded, but you described just about like sending these positive vibes and wishes and very intentionally for your kids as they were driving through the inclement weather.
Mhm.
And I feel like that about, first of all, I just want to say I just going back to Susie, I know she had once talked about her morning routines and she talked about a morning prayer in particular. And I had come across the same prayer in an Ayurvedic
Mm,
course I took. And the prayer was just about before you get out of bed, just to say, I'm connected to everything, and
mhm,
universal consciousness is in everything, in the mountains and in the earth, in me, in the trees. Like I'm part of that and I'm safe. I am healing and I am healed. And I'm just giving the gist of that. But I feel like even before we encounter our kids in the morning, like I would say just putting that kind of blessing
mhm, mhm,
is
mhm.
it's just going into it in a problem solving, more expanded state. Because I know I've been that parent too, where it's really easy in the morning to be like, oh God, we're going to be late for school and she's not going to get her
Mhm.
socks on time. And are we going to find the socks? And so,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, it's different. It just brings a different quality to how you start and initiate. And
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm. Oh my gosh, it's so good, and it's funny because along the years, I'll read or learn about a practice here and then here and here, and I'm like, "Oh my god, like, how am I gonna which ones am I gonna choose?" But the truth of the matter is when you get down to the core of it is that sort of what you're saying is like in the beginning of the day, starting with a blessing or intention, and I've been kinda like, how we learned about intention and how powerful intention is, and one reason I love the podcast is because people speak about like maybe one thing, like it could be intention, compassion, awareness, like whatever it is, in very different ways. And also with a very unique vibration of who your essence is, how your voice comes across.
Mm.
I know certain guests, they're like a fan favorite with these people, and then another guest will be with these people. And it's all like the resonance of so even when I guess saying that, like to circle back with how I started that whole statement, which I sometimes go off on tangents, is that go with what's in resonance with you.
Yeah.
And you'll know, like a tuning fork, you will know. And going back to your inner soul knowing, or just like your intuition or inner wisdom, keep paying attention, keep calibrating, keep like it's like thing that like it's all getting in alignment. And I want to say like we're just about to close out the interview here, but like I think I said it in a recent podcast with a sound healer, but it was the coolest thing. Like someone sent me a TikTok of some sort of reel, and it was how the cells in our body they show like it's like a dance, like when the resonance of what is in alignment with us, it just gets it in order like that and everybody gets in line. And it's just the coolest thing because maybe we don't have to tell people to get in line and do these things, but if we pay attention to ourselves, all the answers are going to be right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love your word alignment because I think that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. And just paying attention and being aware and honoring ourselves above anything else because we are a true sovereign being, but also we are the knower of what is for us.
Yeah.
And I feel like from this, I'll have to just plant the seed here that it would be really fun because I've done two roundtables, but it would be fun to do a conscious parenting one. There's so many like different ways to come with a few individuals and just get really juicy. But I love everything, Nandi. And thank you so much for being here today. I always ask the guests, I didn't always, but it dawned on me recently, like as we finish up here, is there anything or any message that's coming to you that you want to leave the listeners with? Or if you feel complete, that's great too.
We're living in a time where there's a lot of stress, anxiety. It's hard, as much as we have like this plethora of tools and everything available to us, like I know people still feel so contracted. And so, like you just said a moment ago about, oh my God, like, should I use these 500 tools and strategies? And I think that just adds to our anxiety. And my message really is to lean much more into us, and I feel like even the part of us that's struggling, if we could just have that little moment where we're like, actually, you have a lot of wisdom, little me,
Yes,
little me that's
yes.
struggling. I feel like that is so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great message and such a peaceful one. And I was recently just not advised, but I guess invited to unplug a little bit more. And I think that's like dovetails with your message, like to access that more quiet, more solitude as much as we can, because it is a stressful, busy world. So I always ask where a listener can find you. I don't know if you do social media or you want to leave an email or a website, but I welcome you to do that.
I will have a website up soon, but I don't at the moment. But I'm on Instagram. Yeah. Nandy
Okay.
Wise.
Okay, beautiful. I'll leave it in the show notes too. But thank you. I appreciate every single moment of this conversation. Thank you to the listeners, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Mystical Sisterhood. To learn more about my one-on-one coaching programs or join the Mystical Sisterhood membership, visit maureenspielman.com or mysticalsisterhood.com. Thanks so much. I'll see you in the next episode.